Most people assume Vietnam's sex industry began with the Vietnam War. Others blame modern tourism. But both are wrong. Today, Vietnam is home to one of Southeast Asia's largest underground sex industries. It operates behind the doors of karaoke lounges, massage parlors, bars, hotel, and private companionship networks, especially in major cities such as Ho Chi Minh City. Yet unlike neighboring Thailand or the Philippines, Vietnam has never openly marketed itself as a sex tourism destination. That contradiction raises an uncomfortable question.
Energy's here, you're not ready for the wham. Energy's war, I've never been glam.
If Vietnam does not openly sell sex to tourists, why does such a large underground industry exist? The answer begins long before neon lights, backpackers, or American soldiers ever arrived. Its origins stretch back centuries, hidden behind the poetry of the Tale of Kiều and the quiet entertainment houses of Imperial Vietnam. French colonial rule transformed that discreet tradition into a regulated institution. The Vietnam War expanded it into a vast wartime economy. Socialist reunification tried to erase it. Market reforms gave it new life.
Hey, baby! You got girlfriend, Vietnam?
And today, despite decades of crackdowns, it continues to adapt, surviving in forms that are often invisible to outsiders. This is not just the story of prostitution. It is the story of how empire, war, ideology, and economics reshaped an entire society, leaving consequences that still echo through modern Vietnam. To understand why the industry exists today, we have to begin centuries before the first American helicopter landed in Saigon. Because the story of Vietnam's sex industry did not begin with tourists. Its roots stretched back centuries, preserved in fragments of literature and scattered historical records. To understand how Vietnam became associated with one of Southeast Asia's largest commercial sex industries, we first have to return to a time when it barely existed in public view. Sex work in Vietnam was not a foreign invention. It predated colonial rule by centuries. Behind the elegant silkscreens, tiled courtyards, and flickering oil lamps of pre-colonial Vietnam, another world quietly existed. Surviving records are limited, but one of the country's greatest literary works, the Tale of Kiều, offers a rare window into that hidden society. The story describes Adao singing houses, where educated women entertained wealthy patrons with poetry, music, and conversation. In some cases, those encounters extended beyond performance into intimacy, even as Confucian ideals publicly condemned all sexual relationships outside marriage. The same quiet exchanges unfolded in Vietnam's bustling trading ports. In Hoi An, one of Asia's busiest commercial harbors, foreign merchants and sailors passed through crowded streets lined with inns, tea houses, and taverns. Behind closed doors, discreet arrangements reflected an economy that had learned to accommodate travelers without openly acknowledging the trade. What makes this period remarkable? Not its scale, but its restraint. Commercial sex undoubtedly existed, yet it remained fragmented, local, and carefully concealed. It never developed into the vast urban industry that would later reshape Vietnam's largest cities. Instead, it survived as an open secret, accepted by many, condemned by others, and largely forgotten by history. Everything changed when France arrived. As French colonial rule tightened its grip over Indochina during the late 19th century, prostitution was transformed from a hidden social reality into a regulated colonial institution. What had once operated quietly behind private doors was brought into the open, documented by officials, and placed under government control. Licensed brothels appeared throughout Saigon and Hanoi, registered with colonial authorities and monitored through a system of inspections. Women working inside them were required to undergo regular medical examinations, not to protect their own health, but to reduce the spread of venereal diseases among French soldiers, administrators, and civilian officials. Many of these women were Vietnamese, Chinese, or of mixed heritage, driven into the trade by poverty, debt, displacement, or the limited economic opportunities available under colonial rule. The regulations gave the appearance of order, but they also expanded the industry. By recognizing prostitution as something to be managed rather than eliminated, the colonial administration created a commercial system that was larger, more organized, and more visible than anything Vietnam had experienced before. By the 1930s, Saigon had earned a darker reputation across French Indochina. Beneath its elegant boulevards and European architecture lay a thriving nighttime economy of opium dens, smoky cabarets, gambling halls, and licensed brothels tucked behind respectable facades. After sunset, entire districts came alive with an economy built around the desires of colonial society. Yet, despite its rapid expansion, the industry remained surprisingly limited in one important way. Its customers were still overwhelmingly members of the colonial world. French officials, military personnel, businessmen, and visiting sailors made up the majority of its clientele. International tourism, which would later transform much of Southeast Asia, had not yet arrived. Vietnam possessed the infrastructure of a commercial sex industry, but not the global demand that would eventually redefine it. The machinery had been built. What it lacked was the event that would drive it beyond anything its colonial architects could have imagined. That event arrived with the Vietnam War. The foundations of Vietnam's commercial sex industry had already been laid during the colonial era, but it would take a war to transform it into something far larger than the French administration had ever imagined. Few conflicts of the 20th century have been examined as extensively as the Vietnam War. Historians have documented the military campaigns, political decisions, and ideological struggle that divided the world for decades. Yet beneath those familiar narratives lies another story, one that rarely occupies the center of the historical record. It is the story of the Vietnamese women whose lives became entangled in the enormous wartime economy that grew around hundreds of thousands of foreign troops. This pattern was not unique to Vietnam. Throughout history, military forces have often tolerated, regulated, or quietly encouraged commercial sex in the belief that it improved troop morale and discipline. Wherever large armies remained for extended periods, entertainment districts, bars, and brothels frequently appeared nearby. In its most extreme form, this logic produced systems of organized sexual slavery. Most notoriously, the network of military brothels established by Imperial Japan during the Second World War. Vietnam would become another chapter in this long and deeply troubling history. As American involvement expanded during the 1960s, South Vietnam changed with it. Military bases multiplied across the country, bringing with them an unprecedented flow of money, supplies, and personnel. Entire local economies quickly reorganized to serve the needs of foreign troops. Restaurants, laundries, tailor shops, bars, hotels, and nightclubs flourished around military installations, creating thousands of new opportunities for those desperate to survive in a country being torn apart by war.
Commercial sex expanded alongside them. During the early years of American involvement, many servicemen formed informal relationships with Vietnamese women employed as housemaids, often known as hooch maids. Some of these relationships developed into genuine companionship, while others reflected the severe economic inequalities created by the conflict. As the war intensified and the number of American personnel continued to grow, those informal arrangements increasingly gave way to a far larger commercial industry, operating both around and, in some cases, in coordination with military-controlled environments intended to reduce unauthorized contact and limit the spread of venereal disease. Outside the bases, entire entertainment districts emerged almost overnight. Streets surrounding military installations filled with bars, dance clubs, tea houses, short-time hotels, and brothels, catering primarily to foreign servicemen. In Saigon, areas such as Cho Lon and Tu Do Street, now known as Dong Huy, became symbols of the city's wartime nightlife. American soldiers on rest and recreation, commonly known as R&R, crowded these streets each evening, spending money at a scale few local families had ever witnessed. The economic imbalance was impossible to ignore. For many Vietnamese women, a single evening with a foreign soldier could provide more income than weeks of factory work or agricultural labor. As villages were destroyed, farmland disappeared beneath bombing campaigns, and millions of civilians were displaced, economic survival became increasingly difficult. Faced with shrinking opportunities and growing hardship, many women entered the trade not because they viewed it as desirable, but because it offered one of the few remaining ways to support themselves and their families. Not every relationship followed the same pattern. Some women became known as key women, living with an American serviceman for weeks, months, or even the duration of his deployment. The soldier typically paid for housing, food, clothing, and daily expenses, creating arrangements that often blurred the line between financial necessity, emotional attachment, and personal companionship. These relationships varied enormously from one couple to another, making them difficult to fit into simple historical categories. Behind every personal story stood the wider destruction of war. Programs such as the Strategic Hamlet Program, widespread defoliation campaigns, and the designation of vast free fire zones uprooted millions of rural Vietnamese. Families lost homes, farmland, and livelihoods that had sustained them for generations. Many women found themselves widowed, separated from relatives, or solely responsible for supporting children and elderly family members. For those arriving in rapidly expanding cities, the economy surrounding American military bases often appeared to be the only path to survival. By the final years of the conflict, the transformation was staggering. Historians estimate that by 1975, roughly 500,000 women in South Vietnam were involved in prostitution, making it one of the largest commercial sex industries in the region. What had once been a discreet and largely local trade had become an international wartime economy, fueled by foreign military spending and sustained by the social collapse surrounding it. The consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. The constant movement of soldiers, contractors, journalists, businessmen, and aid workers connected Vietnam to a wider network stretching across Southeast Asia. In the decades that followed, growing concerns over trafficking, the exploitation of women and minors, and transnational sex tourism would increasingly draw international attention, even as governments struggled to respond to problems that had been shaped by years of conflict. Health became another battlefield. Military authorities attempted to limit the spread of sexually transmitted infections through medical inspections, clinics, and health campaigns. Yet diseases such as gonorrhea and syphilis continued to circulate widely among both soldiers and civilians. The women working within the industry often possessed the least power to negotiate safer conditions, while carrying the greatest social burden. Many later became mothers of mixed-race children after American servicemen returned home, leaving them to face discrimination, economic hardship, and an uncertain future alone. The war had transformed far more than Vietnam's cities. It had reshaped lives, families, and an entire underground economy whose consequences would outlast the conflict itself. And when Saigon finally fell, that legacy did not disappear with the last American helicopter. When Saigon fell on April 30th, 1975, the American military presence disappeared almost overnight. Helicopters lifted off from embassy rooftops, the Republic of Vietnam ceased to exist, and the war that had dominated the country's modern history finally came to an end. But one thing did not disappear. The vast commercial sex industry that had expanded around the war remained. It simply lost its largest customer. For hundreds of thousands of women, the end of the conflict did not bring a return to ordinary life. Many had spent years surviving in an economy built around foreign troops. Others had become mothers to mixed-race children after American servicemen returned home. With the war over, they found themselves facing poverty, discrimination, and an uncertain future in a country determined to erase every visible reminder of the former South Vietnamese regime. The new socialist government viewed prostitution not merely as a social problem, but as a symbol of colonialism, capitalism, and foreign occupation. Officials described it as one of the social evils inherited from decades of imperial influence. Across the country, brothels were shut down, entertainment districts were dismantled, and thousands of women were sent to rehabilitation and re-education centers designed to eliminate prostitution through ideological instruction and vocational training. On paper, the campaign appeared decisive. In reality, eliminating the demand proved far more difficult than closing the businesses. The trade simply adapted. Instead of operating openly along the brightly lit streets of wartime Saigon, it moved behind closed doors. Independent brokers replaced visible brothels. Transactions became private, discreet, and increasingly difficult for authorities to monitor. What had once been a highly visible wartime economy evolved into a hidden underground network. For nearly a decade, the government maintained tight control over the economy. Yet by the mid-1980s, Vietnam faced severe economic hardship. Inflation soared, production stagnated, and living standards continued to decline. The revolutionary victory had ended the war, but it had not solved the country's economic crisis. Then came another turning point. In 1986, Vietnam introduced the Doi Moi reforms, opening the country to market-oriented economic policies and international investment. Foreign businesses returned, tourism expanded rapidly. Hotels, restaurants, and entertainment districts multiplied in Vietnam's largest cities. Millions of international visitors began arriving each year, bringing new opportunities for economic growth, but also creating fresh demand for commercial sex. The industry re-emerged in a different form. Unlike the openly regulated brothels of the French colonial period or the military-centered nightlife of the Vietnam War, modern prostitution became increasingly decentralized. Karaoke lounges, massage parlors, beer clubs, cafes, bars, and online platforms often replaced traditional brothels. Much of the trade operated through informal networks, making it far more difficult to identify, regulate, or eliminate. This transformation created a new challenge. The issue was no longer confined to prostitution itself. Authorities increasingly confronted problems linked to human trafficking, organized criminal networks, online recruitment, and the exploitation of vulnerable women and minors. Although Vietnamese law prohibits prostitution, enforcement has struggled to keep pace with an industry that continuously changes its methods, while taking advantage of new technologies and international mobility. Today, Vietnam attracts millions of tourists every year. The overwhelming majority come for its breathtaking landscapes, extraordinary cuisine, rich cultural heritage, and vibrant cities. Yet alongside this legitimate tourism industry, a far smaller underground market continues to exist, operating largely out of public view, despite repeated government crackdowns. Its origins are often misunderstood.
Many assume Vietnam's sex industry emerged with modern tourism. Others see it only as a legacy of the Vietnam War. The historical reality is far more complex. Its earliest roots reach back centuries to quiet singing houses and trading ports. French colonial rule transformed it into a regulated institution. The Vietnam War expanded it into a vast wartime economy, and the decades that followed forced it to evolve again, adapting to new political systems, economic reforms, and global markets. Understanding that history is not about sensationalizing prostitution, it is about recognizing how war, empire, poverty, and rapid economic change can reshape an entire society long after the headlines have faded. Because in Vietnam, the war did not end with the last helicopter. Its echoes are still written into the lives of the people it left behind.